Connor Happer Show, 1620 The Zone. Producer Josh Hodson filling in for Connor today. The last couple of weeks, we have rolled through each one of the opponents in Nebraska's 2024 schedule, but there's a little thing called summer school. We do it every summer. We also wanted to kind of educate ourselves on the new schools in the Big Ten, and to do that, we have welcomed in Tim Booth from the Associated Press. He covers the Washington Huskies up there in Seattle. Tim, welcome to the show and welcome to the Big Ten.
Thank you. I appreciate the warm welcome.
What do you think of the Maps commercial?
I thought it was pretty good. And you know what? They hit UW kind of perfect. You had the stadium, you had the cherry blossoms, you had the library that looks like it's straight out of Harry Potter. So they kind of hit the important elements of the UW campus when they had Washington's little icon pop up.
Big controversy here in Nebraska. They did the balloons for Nebraska. We don't do that anymore. It's bad for the environment, so we don't do that.
I saw the balloons, and I kind of questioned that momentarily. Like, I don't remember that really being a thing the last few years. So,
we haven't scored a lot of points the last few years.
That's true too. It has been sort of an offensive struggle there, hasn't it?
It has. When it was announced, Washington to the Big Ten, what did the fan base feel then, and kind of what do they feel now that it's officially official?
Well, the initial reaction was, what's happened? Because, UW, Oregon, USC, UCLA, they've been these sort of anchor tenants to what everyone has known as West Coast athletics for over 100 years. So the initial reaction was, and partly because it happened so quickly, it happened really in the span of just a few days, basically 1 year ago, that there was a lot of shock and a lot of, how could this happen? And what are you doing breaking up, what everyone has known for decades as, the Pac-10, the Pac-12, the Pac-8, however far back you want to go with the history of it. After that, initial shock sort of dissipated, I think a lot of people saw the potential benefits for Washington in what this could mean down the road. You learned more about the financial woes that the Pac-12 was facing. Had it continued moving forward, the uncertainty about its TV deal, and then knowing what the opportunity was going to be in the Big Ten, knowing, having more certainty in what your revenue streams are, having more certainty in, getting a full share in 5 or 6 years from now of the distribution money that would be available, possibly having an easier entrance into the college football playoff down the road. It started to make more sense for them. I think there's still a lot of people who are wrapping their heads around the reality that Washington and Oregon and the LA schools are at this point. And I don't know if it's really going to fully hit until we get to September 21st, when Washington plays Northwestern in a conference game here in Seattle, or the first time people walk into Husky Stadium and see the Big Ten logo on the field. But people are coming around more and more to that. This is the new reality of what college sports is at. And for Washington to be in the best place, they needed to be in one of the two most powerful conferences in the country.
Did you go to media days?
I did not go to Indianapolis. No.
Okay, so you've not had the St. Elmo's cocktail sauce yet?
No, I have not had the cocktail sauce. I've been to Indianapolis for work one time previously, and that happened to be during COVID, so it was kind of difficult to get out and enjoy all of what Indianapolis had to offer. So no cocktail sauces as of yet for me.
Well, luckily the Big Ten holds a lot of events there. You'll have plenty of chances to have the cocktail sauce. Don't worry.
I'm looking forward to it at some point.
We'll get to kind of the roster and the schedule right now, but I wanted to start by asking, is the fan base more thanks Kalen DeBoer, or is his name persona non grata there?
It's really tough to tell. It really depends on who you talk to. I think there's a great deal of appreciation for what he was able to do in such a short period of time to get Washington to a place that they hadn't been in decades. So there's that of taking what happened last year and putting it into a bubble and saying, thank you for what you did, and helping this school get to that point and get back on the national stage and in that way. The flip side of that is, because of how he talked when he first came to Washington, sort of his demeanor and his persona, there were a lot of people who felt like this was the second coming of Don James. And Don James is an incredibly revered figure in Seattle and at the University of Washington. He came from a small school, wasn't a heralded person who was hired when he came from Kent State back in the 70s. And he turned Washington into the powerhouse that it was on the West Coast throughout the late 70s and into the 80s and into the early 90s, when they won a share of the national title in 91. People looked at Kalen DeBoer and looked at his background and looked at the fact that he'd kind of been this sort of overlooked person who'd worked at all the small schools, and once he got his opportunity at a big power program, here he was flourishing. He had, he just kind of came across in some ways with the same vibe that Don James did. And so fans, especially the older fans, saw him as potentially the second coming of that kind of coach, a guy who's going to be here for 15 years, for 20 years, and be the anchor to that program. So there is some resentment because he just up and left after 2 years, that he jumped at really what was the first, major opportunity he had to leave Washington. Now, who's going to turn down Alabama? I mean, right. It is the job. Maybe you don't want to be the guy to follow Nick Saban, but who's going to turn down that opportunity to go coach at Alabama? It's one of maybe 4 or 5 places in the country that you get the opportunity to coach there. You don't say no. You really don't turn down that chance. So I think over time, people, those people who feel some resentment will come around on it. But for right now, it's kind of a split division. Some people are appreciative, and some people are like, why did you leave? Why couldn't you stay and see this through and help Washington with this transition and see if you can stay at the top after what you did last year?
Can you sort of walk us through the 6-day whirlwind of losing the national championship game, and then you lose your coach, and then Jed Fish? It all happened in the course of a week. That was a really emotional week.
Yeah, it's one of the crazier weeks that I can remember being in this job, because just the massive swings. It was like one gut punch after another for basically 72 hours. You don't play well and you lose to Michigan. You have to come home and deal with the ramifications of the fallout of that. And you don't have Michael Penix anymore, and you don't have Rome Odunze anymore, and you don't have all these guys who were stars and getting you to this point, and sort of circling back to the reality of how do we do this again. And then Nick Saban retires, and you just watch the dominoes start to fall, and very quickly you saw that the domino was kind of leading toward Kalen DeBoer. And then by Friday, he's gone. He's taken the Alabama job, and then by Sunday, you've got I don't know if you can go through a 6-day span with more just wildly emotional swings than what the program went through. And I think in some ways they're still kind of trying to recover, from that. Jed Fish probably wasn't everyone's number one pick. He was probably the best you could do in that situation. But to just kind of go on this incredible roller coaster. And it was partly because things had been so high for the previous, 6 weeks, really. You beat Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game, a game that you were a heavy underdog to lose. You go to New Orleans and you beat Texas in just an absolute crazy game. Like, everything is pointing upward for what Washington is. And then just to hit the crest of that and lose to Michigan, and then just have this incredibly steep dive for 5 days. I don't. There's going to be a 30 for 30 made about what that 6 days was like, because it was so just wildly, such a wild roller coaster for that program.
I would watch it. That a super compelling story, and just swing after swing, like you said. But with the coaching change comes a number of other changes. The roster turns over. 2 of 22 starters are returning. That's not a lot, Tim. I'll tell you that right now. I'm sure you're aware. How does Jed Fish sort of look to march forward and keep Washington rolling?
This year is going to be one of the great experiments in college sports, especially in this era of college sports. How quickly can you take this mishmash of players that you've brought together and make them into something that is successful and competitive? Like you said, you've only got 2 starters coming back. You lost, 40 guys in the transfer portal who went to other places when the previous coaching staff, scattered and went to their various new homes. You brought in, between freshmen and transfers, you've brought in 40 to 50 new players on this roster for this year. And really the first time that they are all going to be together on the field is this 4 to 5 week lead up to their season opener, because you had a lot of guys who either weren't here during spring practice or were recovering from injuries at that time. So they weren't really out there on the field learning the new offense, learning the new systems. And you have a coaching staff that is mostly what Fish brought from Arizona, but you have a couple of key guys in spots who've never done it at this level before. It's a great chemistry experiment. Just throw all these ingredients together in a pot and see if you can come up with something that looks like a functioning football team. To the level that everyone sort of got used to a year ago. And by the way, you're now going and playing in what's easily to be considered a tougher conference, with new challenges, more travel, teams you've never seen before, styles you've probably never played against before. I don't know how you define success this year for them. I think 500 might be looked back upon down the road as a very successful season for this team because of all the challenges they faced, putting this all together and then going in and playing in a new conference for the first time.
We've done several segments over the summer of Washington could win 5 games or they could win 10 games. We don't know. So
I don't think they're a 10-win team.
Right.
I don't think this is a 10-win team. I think they have a very good chance, and it's kind of funny that Michigan would be the opponent. They have a very good chance to be 5-0 when they get to the first weekend in October. And here comes Michigan back to Seattle for a conference game and a rematch of the national title game. I mean, come on, College Game Day will be here, and it'll be a big to do, and Michigan will probably hammer them. But there's a decent chance, based around the way their schedule is set up, that they could be 5-0 at that point. I don't know if they win more than 2 games the rest of the way. So to me, this is, and if they do, if they go 8-4, if they go 9-3, Jed Fish probably should be coach of the year. Realistically, based around the challenges that they faced this offseason. I tend to think this is a 6 or 7 win team going into the season. And yeah, a lot of those wins are probably going to come on the front end, but I think in a bubble, you'd have to look at it and say, that's a really successful season, even though it's nowhere near where they got last year and probably not where the expectations should be for what the program is moving forward. I think 6-7 wins this year would really have to be looked at as a success.
Well, they're like the only team in the Big Ten that gets to play 5 of the top 6 teams in the Big Ten last year, or whatever the statistic is. I've got a bunch of questions about Will Rogers, Stephen Belichick's hair, but I'm in Nebraska, so I guess I have to ask about Troy Dannon. He was only there for a very short time, but what do you know and can pass on to us about the former Washington AD?
It's, because he was here such a short time, a lot of people never got a chance to get to know him very well. He was really highly regarded in the industry when he was brought in here. He showed up 2 months after the announcement that the school was going to the Big Ten. So instantly he's walking into new challenges in that way, of trying to figure out what all that is going to look at. He walks in and then all of a sudden goes on this major run with his football program in the midst of, a men's basketball program that was kind of in shambles. They're trying to get a basketball practice facility, finalized, and they finally broke ground on that this spring. Because they've been just using the basketball gym for their workouts and stuff. So they'll have a true basketball practice facility moving forward. But his departure left a lot of people very sour, that you would come to a place for 5 months and then bolt. Obviously he's got roots in the Midwest. It made sense from that standpoint. But there's a lot of, angry people that he didn't see through, even 6 months, being on the job here in Seattle, again, with all of the changes that are going on, right now. All that being said, I think he's a really smart AD. I think he gets the landscape of things. I think he probably is a good fit for Nebraska moving forward. And at the end of the day, I think Washington probably got the person that they wanted to hire initially anyway, when they were able to convince Pat Chun to leave Washington State and come over to Washington. I think all things being equal, I think they would have preferred to hire Pat Chun back in, October of last year when Dannon got the job. But at that time, Chun was in the middle of trying to figure out what Washington State's future was going to be like. And he, has openly said he had hopes of getting the job at Ohio State when Gene Smith stepped down. That job obviously went to Ross Bjork, which set off the chain reaction that led to Trev Alberts leaving, and then led to Troy Dannon ending up at Nebraska. But I think at the end of the day, if they could go back in time, or if you ask somebody back in September a year ago, their number one candidate to take the job at that time probably would have been Pat Chun. So at the end of the day, I think they ended up with the person they probably wanted to, but it just got kind of messy in getting to that point.
Tim Booth, Associated Press, thank you so much for bringing us up to speed on Washington. Hopefully we can do it again this season.
Yep, would be happy to. Thank you for having me on.
All right, there he is, Tim Booth, Associated Press. Read his stuff. You can follow him on Twitter at @ByTimBooth. I didn't get to my Mariners questions with him. I had Apple Cup questions. I seriously, I had multiple questions about Stephen Belichick's hair. He's their defensive coordinator. Never been a coordinator before. Sure, a lot of people would go that route with the Stephen Belichick questions. My questions were about his hair. I just want to know, what's it doing? Is it flowing? Is it long? Did he go, I got a big boy job, I need a big boy haircut, and he cut his hair to look more like an adult? I don't know. Now we won't know until, they trot out. I think they play like Weber State, their first game. I should have had this pulled up. I apologize. Let me look this up. Washington football schedule 2024. Yeah, Weber State, August 31st.